I'm Eva, 27 years old, a healthcare worker at Seattle General Hospital. Growing up, my relationship with my parents was complicated, but I still looked forward to our annual family vacation tradition. It meant a lot to me, a chance to reconnect and heal old wounds. When they called saying they couldn't afford to take me this year, I was disappointed but understood. That is until I saw my mom's Facebook post. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by the people who should love you most. This story might help you know you're not alone. Seattle winters can be dreary, but they've got nothing on the coldness I experienced growing up in my family's modest two-story home in Maplewood, a small town just outside of Seattle. On paper, we looked perfect, my mother Jessica, 52. A beloved elementary school teacher known for her Pinterest-worthy classroom decorations and active Facebook presence. My father Thomas, 54. A sales representative for a pharmaceutical company with a charming smile that helped him meet quota month after month. My younger sister Sophia, 22. The golden child currently studying business at the State University. And me, Eva, the eldest daughter who never quite measured up. From an early age, I noticed the difference in how my parents treated Sophia and me. When I brought home an A-, my mother would ask why it wasn't an A+. When Sophia brought home a B, there would be celebration dinners and social media posts about how proud they were of her hard work. My achievements were expected. Hers were exceptional. Eva, you need to set a good example for your sister, my father would say whenever I expressed any frustration. As the oldest, you should know better. The weight of those expectations shaped my childhood, turning me into a perfectionist who was never quite perfect enough. Our annual family vacation was the one time I felt like a true part of the family. For 1 week each year, we'd escape to somewhere beautiful. My father would relax, my mother would put down her phone, and sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of the love and approval I so desperately sought. There's a photo from our trip to Yellowstone when I was 12, the four of us standing in front of Old Faithful. My mother has her arm around me and I'm beaming. It's one of the few childhood photos where my smile reaches my eyes. After high school, I pursued nursing partly because I genuinely wanted to help people, but also because I knew it would be a ticket out of Maplewood. Seattle General Hospital offered me a position immediately after graduation, and I jumped at the opportunity. My own apartment in Capitol Hill, a job where my meticulousness was appreciated rather than expected, and distance from the constant comparison to my sister, it felt like freedom. My parents weren't thrilled when I moved. What about family Sunday dinners? My mother had asked, her voice tight with disapproval. And who will help your sister with her college applications? My father had simply sighed and said, well, I suppose you've always been independent. Despite the distance, I made efforts to stay connected. Weekly phone calls, visits during holidays, and yes, our annual family vacation. Last year we went to San Diego. The tension was still there, simmering beneath forced smiles and beachside photos, but I kept trying. Because that's what families do, right? They try. 6 months ago, I met Jake, 29, a software engineer with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that immediately drew me in. On our third date, when he asked about my family and actually listened to my answer, I realized how rare that was. Most people's eyes glazed over when I tried to explain the complicated dynamics of the Stewart family, but Jake paid attention. He asked questions. He validated my feelings. It sounds like you've been chasing their approval for a long time, he said one evening as we walked along the waterfront. What would happen if you stopped? That question stayed with me, echoing in my mind during my next phone call with my mother, when she spent 15 minutes talking about Sophia's academic achievements before asking about my life as an afterthought. What would happen if I stopped seeking their approval? I wasn't sure I was ready to find out. The annual family vacation was approaching, a 2-week trip to Hawaii that had been planned for months. I had already requested the time off work, researched local attractions, and even bought a new bathing suit. Despite everything, I was looking forward to it. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year I'd finally feel like I belonged. The Zoom call was supposed to be a final planning session for our Hawaii trip. I'd taken my lunch break specifically for this sitting in the hospital courtyard, with my sandwich untouched beside me as I waited for my family to connect. When all three of their faces appeared on my screen, something felt off immediately. My mother wouldn't make eye contact. My father kept clearing his throat. Only Sophia looked normal, scrolling through her phone with half-hearted attention. "Eva, honey," my mother began, her teacher voice in full effect. "We need to talk about the vacation." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. It was the same one she'd used when telling me my childhood dog had died, or when explaining why they couldn't come to my nursing school graduation because Sophia had a dance recital the same weekend. "We've been looking at our finances," my father jumped in, adjusting his glasses nervously. "And with the current economic situation, we just can't afford to take everyone this year." I blinked, trying to process this. "What do you mean by everyone?" My mother sighed dramatically. "We can't afford your portion of the trip, Eva. The flights have gotten so expensive, and the resort raised its rates. We thought about canceling altogether, but Sophia has been working so hard at school and really needs this break." From the corner of the screen, Sophia finally looked up from her phone to give me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry, sis. Maybe next year." I sat there, sandwich forgotten, as they continued explaining their sudden financial hardship. My father mentioned something about investments not performing well. My mother talked about unexpected house repairs. Their stories seemed to shift and change throughout the conversation, details contradicting each other in ways I might not have noticed if I hadn't been paying such close attention. "I understand that things are tight," I said finally, my voice calmer than I felt. "If it's a matter of money, I'm happy to pay my own way. I've been saving for this." It was true. I'd been putting aside money specifically for this trip, wanting to treat my family to a nice dinner as a thank you for including me. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "That's very generous, honey," my mother said. "But it's not just the money. The resort is fully booked now. There literally isn't space for another person." "But you already booked my room, right? When you made the reservations months ago." Another uncomfortable pause. My father cleared his throat again. "We had to downsize to a smaller villa to save costs. There just isn't room anymore." Something didn't add up, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. I ended the call feeling disappointed, but trying to be understanding. Times were tough for everyone, and while the timing was terrible, I believed they genuinely couldn't afford the extra expense. That belief started to crumble the very next day when my mother posted photos of her new Louis Vuitton handbag on Instagram with the caption, "Treating myself, life is short." The bag cost more than my share of the Hawaii trip would have. 2 days later, my father shared his excitement about the new golf clubs he'd purchased. "State-of-the-art technology," he boasted during our family group chat. "These will definitely improve my game." And then came Sophia's excited call about the MacBook Pro our parents had just bought her to help with school. The pieces weren't just failing to add up, they were actively contradicting each other. That evening, Jake came over with takeout and found me staring at my phone, scrolling through these posts with increasing confusion and hurt. "Something feels off," I told him as we sat on my small balcony. "They claim they can't afford to take me on this vacation, but they're spending money on luxury items like it's nothing." Jake listened quietly, then asked, "Have they done things like this before?" The question made me think back to all the times my parents had claimed they couldn't afford something for me while providing it easily for Sophia. The dance classes that were too expensive for me but somehow affordable when my sister showed interest 3 years later. The used car I had to buy with my own savings while Sophia received a new one for her 16th birthday. The pattern had always been there, but I'd made excuses, told myself it was different circumstances, different timing. "I think I need to find out if they're actually going on this vacation," I said finally. "How will you do that?" I thought about my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who had always been kind to me. She wasn't close with my parents, but she kept up with family news. I called her the next morning. "Hawaii," she said, sounding confused. "Yes, your mother mentioned they were all going next week. Said something about Sophia bringing her new boyfriend to make it a proper family trip." "Why do you ask? Aren't you going?" The confirmation hit like a physical blow. They weren't having financial difficulties. They had simply decided not to include me manufacturing an elaborate lie instead of telling me the truth. And apparently Sophia had a new boyfriend who was worthy of inclusion in the proper family vacation while I was not. I thanked my aunt and hung up, then spent the rest of the day reaching out to other family friends, piecing together the real story. By evening, I knew this truth. My family was still going to Hawaii, staying at the exact resort we'd planned, and they had replaced me with Sophia's boyfriend of 2 months, a business major named David, whom they apparently adored. I don't consider myself a social media addict, but like most people my age, checking my phone is part of my morning routine. That Thursday, I woke up at 6 as usual, made coffee, and scrolled through notifications while waiting for the caffeine to kick in. Among the usual mix of news alerts and app reminders was a Facebook notification: Jessica Stewart has added new photos to the album, Hawaii 2025, Family Time. My finger hovered over the notification. Part of me wanted to ignore it to protect myself from whatever I might see. But I needed to know the full extent of their deception. The album contained 63 photos uploaded at 2 in the morning my time. They must have just returned to their resort after a night out and decided to share their fun with the world. The first image showed my parents and Sophia standing on a pristine beach, the turquoise ocean stretching behind them. They were tanned and smiling, looking more relaxed than I'd seen them in years. The next few photos showcased the luxury resort with its infinity pools and private cabanas. My mother had tagged the location the Grand Wailea, a 5-star resort on Maui that I knew cost well over $1,000 per night. I continued scrolling with growing numbness until I reached a photo that made my coffee mug slip from my fingers, thankfully landing on the carpet without breaking. The image showed my family at a luau dressed in colorful Hawaiian attire. Next to Sophia stood a tall young man with his arm around her waist. My mother's caption read, "Our family and our dear daughter with her new boyfriend. The family is together. The family is together. Without me." In that moment, it wasn't just the lie that hurt. It was the erasure. In their minds, I wasn't necessary for the family to be together. I was so inconsequential that I could be replaced by someone they'd known for mere weeks, and they saw nothing wrong with declaring this publicly. I zoomed in on the photo, studying the details I might have missed. My mother wore a new dress I'd never seen with a designer label I recognized. My father sported an expensive watch that gleamed in the torchlight. Sophia and her boyfriend David were color-coordinated in matching blue outfits that looked fresh off a boutique rack. There was no sign of financial struggle anywhere. The comments underneath were almost as painful as the photo itself. "What a beautiful family, you all look so happy. Family goals right here. Your daughter and her boyfriend make such a cute couple." And then in response to someone asking where I was, "Ava couldn't make it this year. Work commitments. You know how it is, but we're having a wonderful time and we'll bring her back a souvenir." Another lie so casually told that I wondered how many others had come before it. How many times had my mother crafted a more palatable narrative rather than admitting the truth that they had chosen to exclude me? I didn't realize I was crying until a tear splashed onto my phone screen. I wasn't a crier by nature, had prided myself on staying composed even in the most stressful ER shifts, but this betrayal cut deeper than I'd anticipated. I was still sitting there, coffee growing cold, when Jake called. We had plans to meet for breakfast before his work and my evening shift. When I didn't answer, he came directly to my apartment using the key I'd given him last month. He found me staring at my phone, the hurtful photos still displayed. Without a word, he sat beside me and looked at the screen. Then he gently took the phone from my hands, placed it face down on the coffee table, and pulled me into his arms. "I'm so sorry, Eva," he whispered into my hair. "You don't deserve this." Those simple words of validation broke something inside me. I cried, then really cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. Jake held me through it, not offering platitudes or solutions, just presence. When I finally calmed down, he made fresh coffee and sat with me while I processed what had happened. Should I confront them? I asked, voice hoarse from crying. Call them out on the lie. Jake considered this carefully. What would that accomplish? Would it make you feel better or just give them a chance to hurt you more? It was a good question. What did I want from a confrontation? An apology. The truth both seemed unlikely given their history. My parents had never acknowledged their preferential treatment of Sophia, even when it was blatant. Why would they start now? Still, I needed to understand why. I called my sister that afternoon, catching her between luau and snorkeling trip. To her credit, she answered. Why didn't you tell me the truth? I asked, skipping pleasantries. Why the elaborate lie about money? Sophia sighed, the sound of waves audible in the background. It wasn't my idea, Ava. Mom and Dad thought it would be easier this way. Easier than what, telling me they wanted to take your boyfriend instead of me. David's family is really well connected, she said, as if that explained everything. His dad plays golf with the dean of my business school. Mom and Dad thought it would be good to get to know him better, and there were only 4 spots in the villa. They could have been honest about that. Could they? Would you have understood? Or would you have made it into a whole thing about how they always choose me over you? Her words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. I would have been hurt regardless, but I might have respected their honesty. What I couldn't respect was the lie, the way they'd tried to make me believe they couldn't afford the trip, rather than admitting they simply didn't want me there. You're right, I said finally. I would have been upset, but I wouldn't have made you all lie to me for weeks and pretend to be broke while buying luxury items. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Look, I'm sorry it happened this way, but David and I are serious, and it's important to me that he bonds with Mom and Dad. Can't you just be happy for me for once instead of making everything about you? The unfairness of this accusation left me speechless. I had spent my entire life trying not to make things about me, shrinking myself to make room for Sophia's outsized presence in our family. But pointing this out would only reinforce her narrative. So instead, I ended the call with a simple, "Enjoy your vacation," and blocked her number. After discovering the truth about the Hawaii trip, my first instinct was to lash out. To comment on every photo exposing their lies publicly. To call my parents and scream at them. To make them feel even a fraction of the pain and humiliation I was experiencing. Instead, I did nothing. I didn't comment on the photos. I didn't send angry texts. I didn't call to confront them. I simply muted their social media accounts, turned off notifications from our family chat, and focused on healing myself. This wasn't passive acceptance. It was a deliberate choice. A recognition that engaging with their toxicity would only drag me further into a dynamic that had been hurting me for decades. Their actions had shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities, and no argument or confrontation would change that fundamental truth. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Jake asked, as we walked through Discovery Park that weekend, the early summer sun warming our shoulders. Saying nothing at all. I considered his question carefully, watching a family of ducks glide across the pond. I'm not saying nothing forever. I'm saying nothing right now, while I figure out what I actually want going forward. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted yet. Did I want to maintain a relationship with my family knowing they were capable of such calculated exclusion? Did I want to set new boundaries, or did I want to step away entirely? These weren't decisions to make in the heat of emotion. So instead of reacting externally, I turned inward. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Marshall, a therapist I'd seen occasionally during nursing school. In her calm office with views of Elliott Bay, I unpacked not just the Hawaii incident, but the lifetime of similar moments that had preceded it. What I'm hearing, Dr. Marshall said during our second session, is a pattern of conditional love. Your parents seem to value you based on what you can provide for them, not simply because you're their daughter. That observation hit me hard. I thought about all the times my worth had been tied to my achievements, my usefulness, my willingness to step aside for Sophia. The nursing career I'd chosen partly because it would make me valuable to them as they aged. The way I always remembered birthdays and anniversaries when no one remembered mine. The question now, Dr. Marshall continued, is what kind of relationship you want going forward, knowing what you know. I didn't have an immediate answer, but the question gave me a framework for my reflection. Instead of focusing on their actions, I started thinking about what I wanted and needed from family relationships. During this period of introspection, I doubled down on my work at the hospital. There was something comforting about the clear protocols of emergency medicine, the straightforward relationship between action and outcome. I picked up extra shifts, volunteered for the challenging cases that others avoided, and found purpose in the immediate gratitude of patients who didn't have a lifetime of expectations coloring their perception of me. My relationship with Jake deepened during this time as well. He never pushed me to reconcile with my family or to cut them off entirely. Instead, he supported whatever process I needed to go through, offering perspective when asked, but never imposing his opinions. One evening, as we cooked dinner together in my small kitchen, Jake asked, "What would your ideal outcome be if you could wave a magic wand and fix this situation? What would it look like?" The question stayed with me for days. My initial fantasy involved my parents having a sudden epiphany, recognizing their unfair treatment and making amends. But as I dug deeper, I realized what I truly wanted was simpler respect. Not preferential treatment, not excessive attention, just basic respect for my feelings and recognition of my place in the family. With this clarity, I decided that when my family returned from Hawaii, I would have a calm, direct conversation with them about how their actions had affected me and what needed to change for us to move forward. I would set boundaries without ultimatums. I would speak my truth without expecting them to immediately accept it. But before they returned, I needed to heal enough to have that conversation from a place of strength rather than hurt. So when my friend Tasha, a fellow nurse, invited me on a weekend trip to a cabin in the Cascade Mountains, I accepted. The 3 days of hiking campfires and conversation with people who valued me exactly as I was proved to be powerfully restorative. "You seem different," Tasha observed as we watched the sunset from the cabin's deck on our final evening. "Lighter somehow." She was right. Something had shifted inside me. The desperate need for my parents' approval had begun to loosen its grip. I was starting to recognize that their inability to love me properly was their limitation, not mine. This realization didn't erase the hurt, but it changed how I carried it. In my journal that night, I wrote, "Today I realized I've been trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I've been auditing for a course I was already enrolled in. The problem isn't that I failed to prove my worth. The problem is that I was asked to prove it at all. Moving forward, I will only invest in relationships where my presence is valued, not merely tolerated." When I returned to Seattle, I felt prepared for whatever came next. I had created a script for my conversation with my parents, practiced it with Jake and Dr. Marshall, and set a date to drive to Maplewood the weekend after their return. But my carefully laid plans were about to be derailed in a way I never could have anticipated. The call came at 2:17 in the morning, jolting me from a dreamless sleep. Jake stirred beside me, but didn't wake as I fumbled for my phone in the darkness. The screen showed my mother's name, which was strange in itself. We hadn't spoken since before the Hawaii trip, and she never called this late. "Mom," I answered, instantly alert. Late-night calls rarely brought good news. "Ava." Her voice was tight-controlled in that way that meant she was barely holding it together. "There's been an accident." My nurse training kicked in immediately. "What kind of accident? Is anyone hurt? Do you need medical advice?" "Your father." Now her voice cracked. We were driving back from the airport. A truck ran a red light. He's in surgery now." Despite everything, my heart dropped. Whatever issues I had with my father, I never wanted him physically harmed. "Which hospital I can be there in Seattle Memorial?" She cut me off. "They airlifted him. Multiple broken bones, internal bleeding. The doctors are saying—" She broke down, then her sobs echoing through the phone. "They're saying he needs specialized surgery that our insurance won't fully cover. Eva, we need your help." The irony wasn't lost on me. After excluding me from their family vacation, they were now turning to me in crisis. But this wasn't the time for pointing that out. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I dressed quickly in the dark, Jake woke up. "What's happening?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. "My father's been in a serious car accident. He's at Seattle Memorial." I pulled on my shoes, mind racing through possibilities. "I need to go." Jake was immediately fully awake. "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He was already getting dressed. "Whatever you're about to face, you shouldn't face it alone." We made it to the hospital in record time. The emergency department was relatively quiet for a weeknight, the harsh fluorescent lights illuminating a handful of patients waiting to be seen. I approached the desk, introduced myself as a nurse from Seattle General, and asked about my father. The receptionist directed us to the surgical waiting area on the 4th floor. As the elevator climbed, Jake squeezed my hand. "Remember," he said quietly, "you can support your father without forgetting how they treated you." When the doors opened, I immediately spotted my mother and Sophia huddled together on uncomfortable-looking chairs. My mother's perfectly maintained appearance had crumbled. Her makeup was smeared, her designer clothes wrinkled. Sophia's eyes were red and puffy, her face blotchy from crying. Neither of them saw us approach, too absorbed in their whispered conversation. I cleared my throat and they looked up simultaneously. "Ava!" My mother sprang to her feet, rushing toward me with outstretched arms. "Oh, thank goodness you're here. We need you." I allowed her brief hug, but stepped back quickly, maintaining some emotional distance despite the circumstances. "What's happening with Dad? Has there been any update from surgery?" My mother launched into a scattered explanation about collision impacts and surgical procedures that I struggled to follow. Jake gently suggested she sit down, then asked for the name of my father's surgeon so I could get more precise information. Using my hospital credentials, I was able to speak directly with the surgical resident. The news wasn't good, but wasn't catastrophic either. My father had multiple fractures, a ruptured spleen, and some liver damage. The surgery was complex, but standard for trauma cases. The resident seemed confident about his recovery, though it would be long and difficult. When I returned to the waiting area and shared this assessment, my mother's reaction surprised me. "But that's not what Dr. Branson said. He told us Thomas needs this experimental procedure that costs $75,000 out of pocket. He said without it, there could be permanent damage." I frowned. "Dr. Branson?" "The surgeon operating on Dad is Dr. Werner." "No, Dr. Branson is the specialist they called in. He came by while you were talking to that resident. Said there's a new approach that could significantly improve recovery outcomes, but it needs to happen within the next 12 hours, and insurance won't cover experimental procedures." This didn't sound right. I excused myself again and went back to the nurse's station. A quick check of the surgical schedule showed no Dr. Branson with privileges at this hospital, and no additional procedures scheduled for my father beyond the current surgery. When I returned to the waiting area, the confusion in my expression must have been evident because my mother immediately became defensive. "What, you don't believe me?" Her voice rose sharply. "Why would I make this up?" "I'm not saying you're making anything up," I said carefully. "I'm saying there might be a misunderstanding. There's no Dr. Branson listed at this hospital and no additional procedures scheduled for Dad." "Well, maybe they haven't updated the system yet. All I know is that this doctor came by, explained the situation, and said we need to decide quickly. And we need your help to pay for it, Eva. Our finances are complicated right now." That was when Sophia decided to chime in. "You would know why if you'd bothered to talk to us recently instead of ignoring everyone." I stared at her incredulous. "Are you seriously trying to blame me right now? If you'd come on the vacation like a normal family member, Dad wouldn't have been so stressed and tired from the flight. He wouldn't have been driving back from the airport at night. This wouldn't have happened." The absurdity of this accusation left me momentarily speechless. Jake stepped in. "That's an unfair and illogical connection to make, especially at a time like this." Sophia glared at him. "This is family business. You shouldn't even be here. He's here because I want him here, I said, finding my voice. And let's be clear, I didn't come on the vacation because you all lied to me and said you couldn't afford it, then replaced me with David. Remember? My mother threw up her hands. Is this really the time to rehash ancient history? Your father is in surgery fighting for his life. It's not ancient history, Mom. It was literally last week. And according to the actual surgical team, Dad is stable and expected to recover. So you're refusing to help. My mother's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. After everything we've done for you, I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I'm not refusing to help. I'm saying I don't believe there's a $75,000 experimental procedure that needs to happen because I've checked with the hospital staff and there's no record of it. Of course you'd find a way to abandon your family when we need you most, Sophia snapped. You've always been selfish. Something inside me went very still and quiet. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. Even now, with our father in surgery, their priority wasn't his actual medical care, but maintaining their narrative of me as the difficult, uncooperative daughter. I'm going to check on Dad's actual status, I said, my voice calm. Then we can discuss next steps based on facts, not speculation. I walked away, Jake following silently. We found a quiet corner where I could call a colleague at Seattle Memorial who owed me a favor. 20 minutes later, I had confirmation there was no Dr. Branson, no experimental procedure, and no immediate need for any payment. My father's surgery was covered by insurance, and while there would be out-of-pocket costs for his recovery, they would be manageable with a payment plan. They're lying again, I said to Jake, the realization settling heavily in my chest. Using a medical emergency to try to extract money from me. What do you want to do? I thought about it carefully. I want to make sure my father receives appropriate medical care. That's my priority right now. The rest I'll deal with once he's stable. We returned to the waiting area where my mother and Sophia were huddled with a young man I recognized from the Hawaii photos as David. He looked uncomfortable, clearly out of his depth in this family drama. I've spoken with Dad's actual medical team, I announced. The surgery is going well, he's expected to recover, and there is no experimental procedure needed. His care is covered by insurance. My mother's face went through a remarkable transformation, shifting from distress to confusion to a kind of calculated anger. Are you calling me a liar in front of everyone when your father is fighting for his life? I'm stating facts based on conversations with the medical professionals responsible for Dad's care. If those facts contradict what you've been saying, that's not my doing. Sophia stood up, fists clenched. You've always been like this, always thinking you know better than everyone else because you're a nurse. Well, guess what? That doesn't make you part of Dad's surgical team. You don't know everything. I kept my voice level. I know enough to recognize when I'm being manipulated. Just like with the Hawaii trip. Oh my God, are you still hung up on that stupid vacation? Sophia rolled her eyes dramatically. Get over yourself. It's not about the vacation. It's about the pattern of dishonesty. Mom and Dad told me they couldn't afford to take me, then spent thousands on luxury items and took you and your boyfriend instead. Now you're telling me Dad needs an experimental procedure that doesn't exist, asking me for money when you just returned from a 5-star resort. Do you see the pattern? My mother stood. Then her face flushed with anger. We needed that vacation. After everything we've been through, we deserved it. And yes, we brought David instead of you because he makes your sister happy and her happiness matters to us. The blunt admission stunned me into silence. Not because it was surprising, but because it was so casually cruel in its honesty. And now, she continued, building momentum. When we genuinely need your help, you're throwing that decision in our faces and refusing to support your family. What kind of daughter does that make you? I looked at her for a long moment, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time. It makes me a daughter who finally understands her place in this family. And it's not where I thought it was. I turned to Jake. Would you mind waiting for the surgical update? I need some air. Outside the hospital parking lot was quiet the early morning hours, bringing a temporary lull in the normal chaos of emergency medicine. I sat on a bench watching the sky lighten almost imperceptibly with the promise of dawn and made my decision. When Dr. Werner emerged from surgery 3 hours later, his update confirmed what I already knew. My father's injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. The surgery had been successful, and while recovery would take months, there was every reason to expect him to regain full function. My mother and Sophia received this news with visible relief, but quickly pivoted back to financial concerns. "The hospital stay alone will bankrupt us," my mother fretted loud enough for everyone in the waiting room to hear. "And physical therapy costs are astronomical. Not to mention, we'll need to make the house accessible while he recovers. Eva, we're going to need your help." I had spent the past hours thinking, processing, and coming to terms with what needed to happen next. Now I felt strangely calm. "I've thought about this carefully," I said, looking my mother directly in the eyes. "I'm willing to help ensure Dad receives appropriate medical care, but I won't be giving you any money directly." "What is that supposed to mean?" she demanded. "It means I'll speak with the hospital financial services about setting up a payment plan for Dad's treatment. I'll contribute to that plan, but I won't hand over cash to you or Sophia for unverified expenses." "You don't trust us," she said flatly. "No," I agreed. "I don't. You've lied to me repeatedly, most recently about an imaginary specialist and experimental procedure. You've shown that when it comes to money, your words can't be trusted." Sophia stepped forward, eyes blazing. "After everything our parents have done for you, this is how you repay them, by treating them like criminals." "What exactly have they done for me, Sophia? Can you name one thing in the past 5 years where they put my needs or happiness ahead of yours?" Her momentary silence was telling. "That's what I thought," I continued. "And if they need money so badly, perhaps you could sell the Louis Vuitton bag, the golf clubs, the MacBook Pro, or any of the other luxury items purchased right before your Hawaiian vacation." My mother gasped, as if I'd slapped her. "How dare you? Those things have nothing to do with this situation." "They have everything to do with it. You claimed financial hardship to exclude me from a family vacation, then spent lavishly on yourselves. Now you're claiming financial hardship again and expecting me to bail you out without question. So you're refusing to help," my mother said, her voice cold. "Your father could die and you're refusing to help because of a petty grudge over a vacation." "Dad is not going to die. I just spoke with his surgeon, and I am helping, just not in the way you want me to." "This is unbelievable," Sophia interjected. "You're really going to hold this over our heads while Dad is lying in intensive care?" I looked between them, these two women who shared my blood, but who had consistently shown that blood wasn't enough to create true family bonds. "I'm done," I said simply. "Not just with this conversation, but with trying to earn a place in this family. I'll ensure Dad gets the medical care he needs because that's the right thing to do. But after that, I'm stepping away." My mother's face contorted with rage. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm cutting ties. No more family dinners pretending we're close. No more accepting the scraps of attention while watching Sophia receive the feast. No more making excuses for being treated as an afterthought." "You can't be serious," Sophia scoffed. "You're going to disown your family over one vacation." "This isn't about one vacation. It's about 27 years of being made to feel like I don't belong. The vacation was just the final confirmation of what I've always suspected, that in your minds, I'm not essential to this family." My mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If you walk away now, don't think you can come crawling back when you realize how much you need us. You won't be welcome." I met her gaze steadily. "That's a risk I'm willing to take." With those words, I felt something shift inside me, not breaking, but settling into place. This wasn't the outcome I would have chosen, but it was the one I could live with. I would ensure my father received proper care, then I would walk away with my dignity intact. Jake and I stayed at the hospital until my father was settled in the ICU. I spoke with the financial services department, arranged for my portion of the medical bills to be paid directly to the hospital, and left my contact information with the nursing staff in case of genuine emergencies. Then we left, ignoring my mother's cold stare and Sophia's dramatic tears. I expected to feel grief as we drove away from the hospital, and there was some. But mostly I felt an unexpected lightness, as if I'd finally put down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. That lightness was about to be tested, however, when 3 days later the hospital called to inform me that my father was awake, stable, and asking to see me alone. I hadn't planned to visit him so soon. Part of me worried it was a trap, another manipulation orchestrated by my mother. But the nurse who called was someone I knew professionally, and she assured me this request came directly from my father without my mother's knowledge. So on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I found myself standing outside my father's hospital room, gathering courage to face whatever waited inside. The man in the bed barely resembled the confident father I knew. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, his normally robust frame diminished by injury and surgery. His face was bruised, one arm in a cast, his breathing shallow but steady. "Ava," he said when he saw me, his voice weak but clear. "You came. The nurse said you wanted to see me." He nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "Your mother and sister don't know you're here. I asked them to go home and rest." I sat in the visitor's chair beside his bed, maintaining some distance. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." He attempted a smile that quickly faded, which is apparently what happened. An awkward silence fell between us. I had no idea why he'd asked to see me, and part of me was still angry enough that I wasn't inclined to make this conversation easier for him. Finally, he spoke again. "I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually." This was not what I had expected. In my entire life, I couldn't remember my father ever apologizing to me for anything significant. "For what specifically?" I asked, wanting clarity rather than a vague blanket statement. He met my eyes directly. "For letting you be treated as less important than your sister. For not standing up for you when it mattered. For going along with excluding you from the Hawaii trip." The last admission caught me by surprise. "You knew about that, about the lie?" He nodded slowly. "It was your mother's idea, but I didn't oppose it. I told myself it was easier that way, less confrontational. But the truth is, I was a coward. I've always been a coward when it comes to standing up to your mother." "Why are you telling me this now?" He gestured weakly at his surroundings. "Nothing like a near-death experience to clarify your regrets. And letting you be pushed aside all these years, that's my biggest regret." I wasn't ready to forgive him, wasn't even sure I believed this sudden insight. One conversation doesn't erase decades of behavior. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Eva. I don't deserve it. I'm just trying to acknowledge the truth before it's too late." Something in his tone made me believe he was sincere, at least in this moment. "What happens now?" I asked. He sighed, the sound rattling slightly in his chest. "I heard what happened in the waiting room. About you cutting ties. Mom told you, in her own way, full of righteous indignation about her ungrateful daughter abandoning the family in our time of need." He shook his head slightly. "But I know your mother. I could read between the lines. And I think you're right to protect yourself. You've tried for years to be part of this family on their terms, and it's never been reciprocated." He paused. His breathing labored for a moment. "I want you to know that I support your decision, even if it means I don't get to see you anymore." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It was perhaps the first time he had ever fully validated my perspective, acknowledged my pain without qualification. "I don't know what I want long-term," I admitted. "But I know I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't." "You shouldn't have to." He reached for my hand, his movements slow and pained. "Whatever you decide, know that at least one person in this family recognizes the wrong that was done to you." We talked for another hour more honestly than we ever had before. He told me about his own complicated relationship with my mother, how her need for social perfection had driven many of the family's decisions. He admitted to enabling Sophia's entitled behavior out of a misguided attempt to compensate for his own absent father. None of it excused the pain they had caused me, but it helped me understand the dysfunctional dynamics that had shaped our family. As I was preparing to leave, he said something that would stay with me in the months ahead. Family should be where you're most valued, not least. Don't let anyone convince you to accept less than that, even if they share your blood. When I left the hospital that day, I didn't know if this conversation would be a new beginning or a final goodbye, but for the first time in my relationship with my father, I felt seen. 6 months can change everything or nothing at all. In my case, it changed almost everything. After that day in the hospital, I maintained minimal contact with my mother and sister, responding to messages only when they directly concerned my father's health. To their credit, they respected my boundaries, perhaps realizing they had pushed too far. Or perhaps they simply didn't care enough to fight for a relationship they had never truly valued. My father's recovery was slow but steady. 2 months after the accident, he made the decision to move out of the family home and into a small apartment closer to his physical therapy facility. My mother presented this to friends and social media as a temporary arrangement for his recovery, but he confided in me that it was likely permanent. Sometimes it takes nearly dying to realize you've been dead inside for years, he told me during one of our weekly phone calls. I don't want to waste whatever time I have left in a marriage that stopped being real long ago. While my relationship with my father was healing, Jake and I were building something new together. 3 months after the hospital confrontation, we found a 2-bedroom apartment in Ballard, a neighborhood north of downtown Seattle with tree-lined streets and a vibrant farmers market every Sunday. Moving in together felt like creating our own definition of family, one based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation. My career took an unexpected turn as well. A position opened in the pediatric emergency department, an area I had always found rewarding but intimidating. Encouraged by Jake and my renewed confidence, I applied and was accepted. Working with children and their parents brought a different kind of fulfillment, allowing me to use my empathy as a strength rather than a vulnerability. The most profound change, however, came from within. I joined a support group for adults dealing with family estrangement, meeting weekly in a community center, with others who understood the complicated grief of choosing to step away from toxic family relationships. These strangers-turned-friends helped me recognize that creating boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary for survival. Family is supposed to be a soft place to land, said Maria, a 60-year-old woman who had cut ties with her abusive brother decades earlier. If it's the hardest place in your world, something is fundamentally wrong. Her words resonated deeply. For most of my life, family interactions had been characterized by tension measurement and the constant fear of falling short. Now I was learning what it felt like to be in relationships where my presence was celebrated rather than tolerated, where I didn't have to earn love through performance or compliance. My mother made one attempt at reconciliation, orchestrated in her typical dramatic fashion. She appeared at the hospital during one of my shifts, tearfully creating a scene in the lobby about her desperate need to reconnect with her daughter. When security escorted her to a private room, her tears vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "This has gone on long enough," she stated flatly. "You've made your point. It's time to come back to the family and stop this childish rebellion." "This isn't a rebellion," I replied calmly. "It's a boundary. And the fact that you see it as something to overcome rather than respect tells me nothing has changed." She left angry but apparently enlightened enough to stop further attempts. Sophia, meanwhile, continued her relationship with David, posting elaborately staged photos of their life together that seemed designed to showcase what I was missing by stepping away from the family. I found I could look at these posts with bemused detachment rather than pain. On a crisp October morning, exactly 6 months after the Hawaii vacation that had catalyzed everything, I met my father for coffee at a small bakery near his new apartment. He looked different, thinner from his recovery, but somehow more substantial in his presence. as if shedding the weight of my mother's expectations had allowed his true self to emerge. "I've been thinking about what family really means," he said as we watched fallen leaves dance across the sidewalk outside. "For too long, I accepted your mother's definition appearance achievement status, but that's not it at all." "What is it then?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. He considered this carefully before answering. "I think family is where you're known completely and loved anyway, where your flaws aren't tolerated but embraced as part of what makes you uniquely you." He smiled slightly. "By that definition, Jake is more your family than your mother or sister ever were." I couldn't argue with that assessment. Jake had seen me at my most vulnerable and responded with unwavering support. He had never asked me to be smaller, quieter, or different to accommodate his needs. He had created space for me to heal at my own pace without rushing or judging the process. "Are you happy, Ava?" my father asked suddenly. Not just coping or managing, but genuinely happy." The question caught me off guard, but the answer came easily. "Yes. For maybe the first time in my adult life, I am." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, even when I didn't know how to help you find it." As we finished our coffee and prepared to part ways, I realized something important. Cutting ties with toxic family members hadn't left me with less family, it had created space for more authentic connections to flourish. My circle was smaller now, but infinitely more nurturing. The constant background noise of trying to earn love had been replaced by the quiet confidence of knowing I was already worthy of it. True family, I had learned, isn't defined by DNA, but by how people treat you when it costs them something. It's found in those who show up consistently, who see your value not as something to be earned, but as intrinsic to who you are. Sometimes those people share your blood, and sometimes they don't. What matters is the love they demonstrate, not the love they claim to feel. If you're watching this and struggling with similar family dynamics, know that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. You deserve relationships that build you up, rather than tear you down, that celebrate your presence rather than merely tolerate it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from those who cannot love you properly, making room for those who can. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If my story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you through that process? Let me know in the comments below. Remember, the family you choose can be even more powerful than the family you're born into.